the stuff that's even closer and even brighter. So maybe the face of those buildings might be closer yet. And then a foreground object might be in pure white. Like that. So that's what a Z-depth image might look like. What happens in the software classically, and this is going back a few years, is you could use black as 0 and white as 1 to give you a percentage of visibilities. So something like fog that you wanted to fog in the city with, you might invert these numbers so that black is the closest, and then use that matte. If we select this area and invert it. Now white is the selected area, and black is the ignored area. So you could use that to comp in atmospheric perspective, for example. But in depth compositing, this information is coming from somewhere else. Sometimes it's coming from the 3D scene. Sometimes it's coming from camera information. Now, I guess is starting to be something that they're recording. I just read the Cinefx article on the BFG, the Spielberg movie, and apparently for on-set stuff, they would be able to calculate where the girl was in frame, so that on stage they were having a live composite that showed the giants behind her, for example, or the full extent of the CG scene behind her. So various programs, I guess After Effects to some extent, but really Nuke is a high-end one that uses this information, this depth information, to allow you to very simply, so if I've got a character I want to insert back here, I can very quickly just drop that in and it will appear to be behind one of the buildings. So let's say it's Godzilla here. So Godzilla gets dropped in behind the buildings and automatically lands in depth. So what we're able to do in the software is much different than what we're able to do on a low budget and with a camera. When we photograph a scene, like we do here, all we have is our cues, our visual cues, and what we remember from the day as to what is in front and what is behind. But luckily, nature has given us lots of cues as to what things are closer and what things are farther away. So there's optical illusions that you can look at where you get tricked into thinking something is closer than it is. A great one is, you guys remember how they did the scale differences back in the original Lord of the Rings films, for example, where they'd have, okay, so Elijah Wood stands this tall, Ian Holm stands this tall, and what's his name? Gandalf. Ian McKellen, right? Are this tall. So they're supposed to be this tall to him. So in order to do that, one of the tricks that they did was to build a table like this, where Gandalf sat at. Here's my Gandalf, sitting at the table. But then back here, several feet back, is the second half of that table. And at that point, you have the other actors at their full size, their regular size, are back here, sitting at it. But when the camera sees this scene, from this point of view, these tables seem to line up, and they'd put props like the teapot and stuff on there so you couldn't see the seam. And then Ian Holm comes over and appears to fill a cup that's up here, but he's actually filling a cup that's back here, and so on. So that's forced perspective, and we have a cue that says, well, because this line seems to connect, our brain is saying, oh, that's one object. But it's really a trick. It's a 2D trick. They couldn't use that trick in the Hobbit series because they filmed in stereo. So they had to come up with a whole new plan for doing it. Did you guys see how they did that? Yeah, I mean, it's 2 sets.
Yeah.
And they're being filmed simultaneously with a synchronized camera.
And he was super sad.
Yes! Ian was, I think I'm going to quit. I can't keep up with this acting.
I was trying to cheer him up.
Yeah. You'll be okay.
Like, why are you guys doing all this? Just do it the other way.
If you want to have the movie spoiled for you next time you watch Lord of the Rings, in the scene, the first scene in Bag End, when Gandalf is being served by Bilbo, Ian Holm hits the table, so the back half wobbles and the front half doesn't. And you can see the trick. You can see the two table trick occurring, because this table's wobbling and this one isn't. So it looks like, why is half the table wobbling and the other half isn't? It's good. Good game.
Sturdy table.
Very, yes. It's the firmament of having Gandalf the Wizard with you. Now, our cues include things like, well, something overlaps, right? That tells our brain that this thing is in front of this thing. Very simple. We take these things for granted that I know that this computer is closer than Jake because the computer's in front of me. And I have stereo, so I can see that as I move, it moves at a different rate, so it's closer, and so on. But if we look at an image like this is a pretty easy image to try to suss out. We can come up with an image that looks like this. And you can see I sort of quit halfway through. But we can do this using the same tricks that we used when we were doing our little lighting experiment in here of gradients, fills, and selections to come up with an image where black represents the distant background up here. The darkest gray is the farthest buildings that we care about. The next darkest gray is the next closer, and so on. And in any case where the building is set at an angle to camera, like we have with this one here or the rooftop here, we can fill with a gradient. And that gradient can start with a color that puts us in line with the next farthest back object, and then goes forward to the next brightest object. So that's the trick I'll show to you today on how to generate that. And once you have an element like that, you can use it to fog in, for example, a city, like we have here. You can see again on the right-hand side of the image, it's incomplete, but this does appear to come forward out of the distant fog. And then what's more, when we select a mask such as this, we can have some control over the depth of it. So by using a slider, we can create a fog that either swallows all the buildings or goes back in space, and you can kind of see how it almost clamps off at different buildings, because we're essentially changing that midpoint value. If you look at the thumbnail, you can see that as they're turning blacker, they're becoming less selected, so that fog is turning off. So heavy foggy day, you know, China, right, Ocean, and so on. So let's, I was thinking about maybe doing a new image, but I didn't find one that seemed like it was going to be easier. So I'll just take this one, and if you guys want to use this one too, that's fine. You can know whether you've got it successfully or not. Okay, so this is plenty big to be able to make good selections with. Some of this will be keying, but I think a lot of it's going to be manual. So let's see if we can get just a deep background with the existing atmospheric perspective. I'm going to take the blue channel, looks like, now the green channel, and dupe it, invert it, try to clamp out the distant stuff. Yeah, it's not going to go. I'll get some of it, but not enough. Let's see if I can do it without. Just want to get, yeah, all I'm going to get is the sky. So that's not, it's not worth doing. So instead what I'll do, I might work back to front. That might be the easiest thing to do. I know that my sky is going to go black. So what I usually do here is start putting in some layers. I know that I need a full deep black all the way back, so I can put that in and I can call that, 100 if you want, because it's 100% away from camera. And if it works, I don't know why my keyboard's not working here. I was going to try and label it. There we go. That's the easiest one. I can turn that off. That's a freebie. And then I know that I need stuff that's 100% close to camera, so 0, if you want to call it. You label that 0. And no typing is working. It's very weird. Okay. And for that, I would select any face that is that would be white. For example, maybe I'm gonna ignore this corner building because it's pretty unimportant in terms of the big picture. But I might take my Marquee tool and try to select the front face of this guy. And maybe the Lasso tool and select the front face of this guy. And they're kind of parallel, right? So maybe that's the next highest value. So I've got it started. All I have to do is map in the thousands of potential values in between. Actually, it's not 1,000, right? It's only 255 values. So thank goodness. And really, if I look at my image, and I might, one convenient thing to do is to double up, duplicate, Command J up the background just as a reference so that you don't have to go all and shut every layer off in order to see the picture again. I like having it on top for that. You might, with a typical image, figure out how many layers you really need to do. So here's my one sort of foreground, and these are all pretty equal. 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings. Then the next one back is this guy and this guy. And the next one back is this guy and this guy. Then it's this guy, and this guy. And then maybe past that I don't care. Because a lot of Z-depth gags, you're going to get a lot of play in the foreground and not so much in the background. And that would be correct. Because if you think about parallax, the farther something is away, the less effect you're going to have. So if you're doing something like a stereo gag with this, which you could do, you could take this image and convert it to 3D with glasses and look at it and have it actually work using this trick. You don't need any depth in the distance. Likewise, the effect of something like a fog coming in, you pretty much want everything past a certain point to have the full effect, and then it starts to attenuate as it gets closer to camera. So really, I think if we tackle this as 3 layers, that should be fine. So the next, let's kind of think about these deep background guys. And I'll have to estimate a little bit where is the, if something's hidden, you know, like the remainder of this building as an example, I would have to kind of guess, you know, where is that, if I can approximate it. So I'm just using a Marquee, probably not the smartest thing, but I got an okay selection there. And I'm going to make this pretty darn black, you know. Looking at a brightness of 20 there, maybe. So fill that. And you can't see it because my thing is full there, but he's a selection. And since these are largely boxes, I could probably just do this Marquee trick to get my selection. This one's stair-stepped ziggurat-y kind of thing, so I have to do a lot of little selections to get the shape of it, but it won't take too long. Fill. Make sure you don't miss any gaps. I think this is better than whipping out the pen tool, but maybe not. Might get pretty fast with it. All right, and he's got a couple of little antennae there, so might be nice to include those. Who else is on that layer? Fill that. Saving as I go. Okay, so here we have distant and pretty darn distant. And then I can just keep adding to that. So the next guy is up. I like this skyline because it's relatively simple. Don't have too much going on. I think I'll do the lasso here. I'm going to include this guy as part of that slab I just did. Now he's at an angle, So he could have gradients done to him, but I'm just gonna do a solid fill back there because it's gonna be a real subtle amount of difference. Okay, so let's call we said this was 20%, which technically is 80 because it's away from camera. I'm gonna make sure that those are kind of layered that way. You don't have to label them, but I, kind of like it. Numerically, I can get my head around that. So the next one might be 60. So that would mean maybe I'm at a 40% opacity for my guys. And here I'll use the pen tool on this one because this building's got some curves. So make a new path, P for pen tool, and make a new path. Once I get in here, I can start to make selections pretty quick. It's got all sorts of weird stuff on the roof, so I want to make sure I'm including that. This is a little different if we needed to comp something behind it. I can be much looser potentially because the effect is going to be subtle. But if I were doing something like a stereo conversion on a piece, I would probably want to want the one piece to be selected. When is that? Sorry, talking and trying to work. There we go. I'm holding down the Command key to single click on a point that I've already laid down. You can keep these paths if you think you need to come back to them and alter them. In this case, this building is also on this layer, so get him selected. Someday I'm going to learn the names of all the buildings in the skyline. I think that would be a good use of my time for some reason. Which means it probably isn't. Alright, and as you can see, I'm selecting anything that's visible, and just for convenience, I'm making sure that anything below the level is also selected. Now I wanted those to be on the same path. For some reason it deselected, so I might be able to bring up the path tool, make a selection, select all. Nope. It's been a while. I've forgotten a lot of my shortcuts here. So, no, it's not letting me do that. Well, I can, luckily I can make my selections on these and then just merge those selections. So I will, again, command click on the thumbnail to load that channel. And I believe if I shift command and click on this one, it should add it. It didn't, though. Too complex. So I'm going to have to load those separately. So here's my new layer. We'll kind of call it 60. It's the next closest thing, which means I'm going to pick the next lightest value, if I want to say 40 or something. And I'll fill that one quick. Oops. But I made, it somehow got closed wrong. As you can see there, it's the inverse of the selection. I don't know what happened there. So I'm going to Shift Command I and fill again. Foreground color, and that's working. Deselect, Command D. Go back to this path, select it, go back to that layer, fill it. And it's doing that again. So, you know what? I bet there's a setting on the pen tool wrong. Let's see. P for path. Path is right. Subtract from shape. Combine shapes is what I wanted. So this I believe is the default would be combined shapes. So I think that's a little weird. I now really no longer need these paths, so I can throw them out if I want. And there we have the start of our city. And we're just going to keep moving forward with black values, gray values, lighter, lighter, lighter until we reach the front. Now where it gets funny is on a building that's got an angle to it. So this is, let's just do this building and make this work. This is going to take some effort. I might give this guy his own layer because he's going to be a blend of all sorts of stuff. Well, let's call this the hero building because it's got the most. Actually, are these connected? Can't tell. If it were, this would be an even more interesting dilemma because all of this architecture would be dealt with collectively. So I know that my front face of the building is not going to be pure white, but it's pretty close. So I might start by making that selection and just coming down just a wee bit. Coming down a little bit and fill in that. I'll check and make sure I got it. Okay. And then theoretically, this little selection is just a wee bit back from that. Fill with that one. Again, it's Alt-Delete or Command-Delete, depending on where your swatch is located, if it's the foreground color or the background color. And fill again. But while I was doing that, I forgot that I wanted to make that one back a little bit further. And that's fine. I could do it right here by just lowering the levels a bit. So while it's selected, I can be giving it a new value too. So I'm working on the faces of it. That's technically harder to do than the piece I'm about to do. So I might end up actually going over some of my work there. So let me grab the roof. I'm going to overshoot by a little bit. Close that selection. Okay. Now I want my gradient to end in this color and begin in a color that's back a little bit further. So that's why having like the next building back is a good idea. But I can kind of estimate it. So my foreground color is that one, which is my not quite white. And I'm going to make my background color pretty farther back. Let's say 80. I think that's going to give us a gradient. Might be pretty subtle. My gradient is going to be a linear gradient going from foreground to background. So I'm going to make sure I have those selected right. And let me exaggerate a little bit for camera. Let's make that 60. Okay. And then I'm going to just drag forward perfectly straight. I'm holding down the Shift key to do that. And I'm going to go from the beginning of a shape to the end of the shape and no further. And I had my swatches set wrong. So exchange. So back to front, straight down, straight towards camera, holding down the Shift key, and only go as far as the selection. And when I do that, that means that this seam should be very hard to see. Oops. So you should just barely be able to see, and in fact, I think it could be a little bit lighter. I'm going to go back and make that selection again. I'm going to pick my background color from there, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pick my foreground color right off of there so that I know that when I make this, again, switching, the wrong side there. Yeah. Now you don't want to see that little halo there. So I'm going to go back to where the reason it showed is because I have a selection there, and it. It's going back too far. I guess it is foreground to background rather than background to foreground. There we go. Okay. So that's ideal. You've got a falling back of color here, but the front seam is seamless. You can't see where my white and my white combine. And the reason being is that pixel occupies the same 3D space as the face of the wall, right? So the edge of the top of the building is really in the same 3D space as the front face of the building. And we want to represent that by having those values be identical. Okay, so now knowing what we know, to place a new building on top of here, like this little structure here, I would make my selection. And technically, this is going to be filled with the same color as the base of this, wherever this is landing. So I can eyedropper right off of there and know that if I fill with that color, that's going to seem to pop forward from the gradient, but be in line with this guy right here, right? So same thing again. I go back here. This is a little bit like the relighting thing, and then you have to think about it 3D space. Think about it in 3D terms. So now this is farther back, but I don't want to sample from here in the picture. I want to sample from here in the picture because it's straight down from there in 3D space. So I turn that off, and I'm just going to sample right about there and fill with that. And that should make that piece come forward real nice when it's properly done. The things that remain would be the gradient between these pieces, so I'll go ahead and select it. I'm not going to worry about the hardware there. It's too small a detail to pick it up. So my gradient will go from color 1 to color 2, straight out from camera. And somehow that front color didn't get sampled. Okay, so eyedropper, eyedropper, gradient. There it is. Okay. You gotta watch out for, make a bad selection, you're gonna have a little seam here. If you do, just grab a brush, soft brush or whatever, and just paint it out. A halo like that would be a hole in the mat, so you'd see it popping, and that would be unattractive. Let me do the rooftop here, and then I'll do the side of it, and we'll test it. We'll test the whole thing. Okay, so back here, it's going to be back a little bit farther, something like that. So my eyedropper, I pick, yeah, and my eyedropper. All right, and now the last part of this, turning this on so I can see it again, is to get the side. The order that you do this in probably doesn't matter, but again, you can see sort of back to front works pretty good for us. All right, this is a challenge because, okay, I got a gap I got to fill too. Bad selections throughout. There's going to be some paint work to fix it. But this gradient should basically be from A here to B here, then G. And do that until it looks right. And I gotta do it the wrong way there. Does that look right? No. Yes, that's right. Okay, so definitely some editing to do here. I think the fastest thing for me would be to go make a little marquee here, select that and fill, paint that problem out. This one's a little trickier. I'll just cheat a bit. Okay. All right. Good enough. Okay. So that looks pretty good. So let's test it. And obviously not all the buildings will work, but we'll see a few that work. All right. So our Z-depth image is going to look something like this, but with a few more pieces in it. At least we'll be able to see the effect on this foreground building. So do not flatten all your stuff, but instead flatten a copy of your stuff. One way to do that is show all the layers that you want to see, and then I think it's Shift, Option, Command, E. Let's see if that works. Yeah. So basically all of the options plus E. Shift, Option, Command, E. Duplicates up whatever you're looking at and makes a new layer. Anytime you're working on a painting, that can be kind of fun to do. Just it's flattening it, but it keeps all of your stuff underneath. So then if you start doing some hand painting stuff and you change your mind, at least you've got that. The next thing we need to do is load this as a channel. Luckily, whenever you're viewing a grayscale channel, all three of those channels are going to be identical. So all you need to do is just grab any one of those and turn it into an alpha. Okay. So all I did was drag blue, but you could take red or green, whatever your favorite color is, and drag it to the Create New Layer icon. Basically, we're taking it from being a layer, being an image here, to something that we can make a selection with, which for us is more important. So I might take these guys and group them, just to keep them handy as my Z-depth layer. Turn that on and off, together or not. Continue to edit that, but let's use we'll use our top reference one to make a little a fog layer. So just to test it, I'll make the fog toxic so we can see it real good. So I'm going to make a new layer and fill it with that. Fill it with that color. I'm going to turn that off because that's terrible. We'll take our alpha. We're going to know that we need it inverted, so I'll just go ahead right away and hit Command-I to invert it. And if you look at the rooftop there, that's looking like that's going to work real nice. And then I'll load it as a selection. Bang. That's a command click on the thumbnail. And then while I'm up here, I'll make that a mask layer. Okay. So distant stuff is all fogged. Farther stuff slightly fogged. Foreground stuff not fogged at all. Now here's where maybe we were right with our values and maybe we weren't. You can see a little bit of a red halo just coming over the crest of that building. If we select this and do levels, just to kind of dial it, you can see the effect working. And the first thing that goes is the corner of the building, the edge, the far edge of the building, until finally the front pops too, right? And that's, you can test that at any time if you want, just to see if it's working. So I think this is a simple enough image to do, because there's only maybe 20 selections to make, to fill them with colors, and then plug it in the way that I've shown you. And you should have a pretty neat effect when you're all done. To turn this in, it's a little tricky, but you can just turn in a sort of a reduced version of this, and that would be, throw out all your junk, and that would be anything except, your alpha and your color layer there. And then I'll be able to play with it with the sliders and just kind of check it and check your work and see how it looks. Obviously, you could make this more realistic with a few simple tricks, like picking a layer mode instead of full opacity and things like that. But I think it depends on the effect that you want to go for. There's toxins. You want to move the toxins forward in the air. All you'd have to do would be to levels that guy and see him popping on. So the gradients come on slow and the fills pop on fast. And that's typical of a Z-depth image. Technically, this could be a little gradient to give the curve, but so far back that you won't really see that effect. If this building was in the foreground, you definitely want it to have a circular mat, and then that radial fill is good for that. You guys have any questions about that? So in the end, you're going to end up with a Z-depth image, and something that normally software makes for you if it's a 3D scene, but if it doesn't, if you're shooting video and you need to create that kind of effect, you're usually matting this manually. And if you want, I'll show you guys how to, in the future, rig that up so you can look at it in stereo and see a full 3D shot. It's pretty cool. Cool?